Welcome to Focus on Albany. I'm Cynthia Pooler. My guest today is Blair Horner, who's the Executive Director of NYPIRG. And we're going to talk about the redistricting process and how the 4 seats that we lost in Albany in New York had ramifications all over the country. So Blair, we talked back in the springtime when all of the maps were being drawn up. We talked a couple of times. And did you think that because of redistricting in New York that we would lose, that the Democrats would lose the House?
Well, I knew it was possible, but a lot of things would have to happen. I mean, at the time, it was looking more like a Republican wave than it turned out to be, and so it may not have made any difference. But certainly, the seeds of New York losing seats, both within the country. Remember, we lost a seat to some extent due to our own inability to do a good job on the census, coupled with what we viewed as a flawed redistricting process, would lead to chaos, which it did. And one of the outcomes is, how much of it's redistricting and how much of it's anything else, of course, is anyone's guess, but it certainly, redistricting contributed to the Democrats losing seats in New York, which, New York is supposedly a blue state. That's not supposed to happen.
Right. So when you watched the news and you saw that we were going to lose 4 seats, or the Democrats were going to lose 4 seats, did that surprise you?
Well, yes. I mean, if you look at it from 30,000 feet, New York hasn't elected a Republican statewide in 20 years. It's been longer since New York voted for a Republican candidate for president. Both houses of the legislature are controlled by overwhelming Democratic majorities. So how could it be, right? I would thought to myself that the Democrats could lose so many seats. And, I think redistricting played a role in it, no doubt, because we can go over this, but ultimately the courts drew the lines in New York, and the courts didn't care where where members of Congress lived. They were just drawing lines that they thought were the fairest. And so people like Sean Patrick Maloney, for example, lived in a congressional district currently in his current congressional district. And when they created the new one, the district that he lived in was 75 to 80% new.
Okay.
And so, that anytime an incumbent has to basically run in a new district, they're basically running as an open seat. And so I think that contributed to the chaos that we saw and the Democratic losses.
We're one of 50 states. So in the other 49 states, why did New York get blamed for a change in the House of Representatives when there's 49 other seats? 49 other states, I'm sorry.
No, you're right. I mean, it's because New York had the most seats flip of any state in the country.
Okay.
And so when you look at it that way, and the margin is going to be close. I mean, the AP, the Associated Press, called the House last night for the Republicans. That puts them at 218. There's still a number of seats that are outstanding, but whatever that the Republican margin will be in the House of Representatives, it's going to be small. It'll be like what the Democrats had for the last 2 years. And if 4 seats flip in one state, and the margin is, let's say, 3 seats, you can see why people would draw a bead on New York. Also, they had the high-profile case where the member of Congress who was the head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee himself lost a Democrat to a Republican, a backbencher in the Assembly. I mean, all of that sort of looks at New York and, well, how the heck did that happen? What's going on in New York? And I would argue that the fact that the courts drew the line in New York contributed, although it was not the only issue, contributed to why Democrats lost so many seats in the House.
So let's talk a little bit about Sean Patrick Maloney. Was his loss a surprise to you?
Yes. Normally, when you pick somebody to be the head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, you're
Right.
assuming that they're a safe person who can raise a lot of money for the people who are going to be threatened. And instead, he was raising money for himself, as it turned out, in a losing effort to hold on to his seat. So normally that doesn't happen, but it's not unheard of. As you may recall, many years ago, the Democratic Speaker of the House in 1994, guy whose last name was Foley from the state of Washington, got beat himself in the Republican wave of 1994. So, I mean, it happens, right? It's not. That's why we live in a democracy. Anybody can lose. But it was surprising that Sean Patrick Maloney, who was viewed in many ways as a rising star among the Democrats, got knocked off.
So when he was deciding which district to run in, was it his decision to run in the new district, or how did that work? Do you know?
Well, I don't know from talking to him, but I mean, in a redistricting cycle, you don't have to live in the district because the lines change like they did here.
Right.
Sean Patrick Maloney had a choice that the district that had the number, Congressional District 17, I believe, that district got moved. That number got moved to another place, but he did live in the district that he was in, that he ran in. But it put him at loggerheads with the existing member of Congress, Mondaire Jones, who most of that district had been in his current district. And so one of them could run in the district where they could primary each other. Mondaire Jones decided to run for a different seat in Manhattan, which he lost.
Boy, it seems so confusing with it to the average layperson. It has to be pretty confusing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it isn't easily explained, that's for sure. But New York lost a seat, right? Every 10 years since 1790, the nation counts how many people live in the country so that they can draw new district lines for the House of Representatives. And that census, when it was done in 2020, which was during the pandemic, New York State was 89 people short of being able to keep one of its congressional seats. So when you go from 27 to 26, it's a political game of musical chairs, and one person got lost. So that's why, so there was that, right? So now you had 27 members of Congress going down to 26. And then the way that the redistricting played out, the lines were drawn by an academic that the courts chose. We could go through, if you want, sort of the insanity that led to the courts stepping in to draw the lines. But when he drew the lines, he was looking at increasing competitiveness. He didn't care about where legislators, members of Congress or state senators lived. He just drew the lines what he thought was best for the communities. And those are the lines. Now, on the Senate side, and under New York, both the members of Congress and the state Senate had their lines drawn by the courts. The courts are about to draw the lines, by the way, for the Assembly, the lower house of New York State Legislature, early next month. So we're going to get to do this all over again. Well, actually, the courts aren't. The Independent Redistricting Commission is supposed to, and if they fail again, then the courts will draw the lines going into 24. But the state Senate stayed solidly Democratic. There may be one or two seats fewer, Democratic seats fewer than there were currently, but it's not a gigantic change. Whereas on the congressional side, going into the election, there were 19 Democrats out of 27, and now there'll be 15 out of 26. And so that's a big switch.
So the balance of power in the House is really going to change politics throughout the country, which I find very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the House of Representatives matters. You need 3 to tango in Washington, just like you do in New York. The House, the Senate, the president all have to be able to agree on things, or things don't happen. And in a Republican-controlled House of Representatives, with a narrow margin, it's gonna be harder for them to sort of manage their own agenda, much less agree to Democrats' agenda.
Mhm.
So it's likely to lead to some form of gridlock.
I think the next couple of years are going to be fun to watch. What do you think?
Well, fun and scary. I'm going to give you one example. So every year or so, the Congress has to approve what's called the debt ceiling,
Right.
and that allows the country to borrow more money to pay its bills. Now, you may think that's a bad idea. You may think it's a good idea, but if the United States doesn't do it, it impacts the credit rating of the country and has an impact on all sorts of things that the country's ability to borrow. Those costs go up, and that means less money available for Social Security, Medicare, defense, whatever you care about. And so that we did miss one of the deadlines during the Trump years because there's this ideological fight over the debt ceiling, and also it's a way to link things that you want to approval of a debt ceiling. Can the House of a Republican-run House of Representatives agree to any debt ceiling? Well, it's going to be very interesting. They may need a lot of Democratic votes if McCarthy, looking like the next speaker, is able to even come to an agreement. So I think there's dangerous, scary times ahead, and McCarthy has expressed some skepticism about American support for Ukraine, for example. And so what does that mean, right?
Right.
On top of that, Social Security is now running on IOUs. So what's going to happen with the Social Security program for people like me who are old enough to collect it? So it is there's a lot of big ticket items that will be dealt with in the next 2 years. And if done poorly, could have dire consequences for the country and the planet.
Do you think it's a given McCarthy's going to become the speaker?
I don't know if it's a given, but he was recently elected to head the Republican caucus this past week. So I assume he'll have the votes, but you need the votes of the House. And so, he has quite a list of, he has a lot of different factions within his caucus. And having a narrow majority is going to make it very difficult for him to move whatever agenda that Republicans want to have in the House.
And there's also going to be maybe a handful of MAGA Republicans that might not like what he wants to do, which makes, I'm going to stock up on popcorn so I could watch this all unfold.
Well, the former Republican speakers of the House ended up leaving because they couldn't keep the mob ruling. So the MAGA Republicans, also known as the Freedom Caucus, their hand is strengthened. And so whether or not McCarthy can escape the fate of former speakers Ryan and Bollard, I think is anyone's guess.
Right. So what's on store over the next couple of months politically in New York State that you're watching?
Well, the big thing is going to be the state budget proposal that comes out from the governor in January. Under the state constitution, she has until February 1st to put out the budget. So she has a later deadline than normal. But I don't know what their timing is going to be, but I would assume she's going to want to put it out sooner. And since she won, her team is still in place. So that to me is going to be the big issue. And then how does I don't know what campaign promises. I haven't kept track of campaign promises the governor's made publicly, and I certainly don't know the ones she made privately to squeak through in her election bid to become governor. So I think the campaign promises that the governor made, both public and private, and how that plays out in the budget and the upcoming state legislative agenda, I think is going to be very interesting. And at the state level, I think that's one of the big issues. It's going to be, the state right now is running on federal aid and the out years. And so the current fiscal year looks reasonably good, and probably next fiscal year will be reasonably good. But you do run into problems, I think, in the out years. And when you're a governor, you get elected to a 4-year term, you want to make your toughest budgetary decisions in year 1, not year 4. Now, she may not have any control over that. If there's a recession, there's a recession, right? There's nothing you can do, but other than prepare for it. So we'll see what she wants to do. I think that, to me, though, the big story will be that, and then how the maps play out for the assembly. That's not an immediate issue because they don't run until 24, but it can make a big difference in terms of, how the members of that house view their political circumstance.
But the Democrats are in no danger of losing the majority in the assembly, right?
Yeah, I think we have Democratic. I mean, you never have political alignments that last forever.
Okay.
The party of Abe Lincoln is now the party that is trying to erode voting rights in the South. So, things change, but for the foreseeable future, the Democrats look like they're going to control both houses of the state legislature, much like most of the rest of the Northeast.
Wow. So, in the for the next census, and then we draw the maps again, will it be as chaotic as in this decade?
Well, unless the system changes, the answer, I think, is yes. Under the current state constitution, the state has something called a so-called independent redistricting commission. It's not really independent, it's bipartisan. 10 people, equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans. Now, by the way, if you're part of the New York voters who are not enrolled in a political party, you have no seat at the table, even though there's more of those people than there are Republicans. But nevertheless, that's the way they set it up. So it's set up to have gridlock. And there's various weirdness about how it all proceeds and everything. And I'll spare your listeners all the details on that. But suffices to say, if you're in the minority in the legislature, as Republicans are now, you have no incentive to make this commission work because you can always go to the courts. And that's what we learned this time, is that when there's chaos and gridlock, the courts just take over and draw the maps. And if you're in the minority party, you probably can't do worse. I mean, I'm sorry, you could definitely do worse than have the courts draw the maps. The courts drawing the maps is probably the best deal the minority party can get. So I think effectively, unless things change, the courts are going to draw the maps for forever, unless the Republican minority agrees to the lines drafted for them by the Democrats. Now, there is the incumbency party, which is when all the incumbents get taken care of in redistricting. And so you could cobble together support there, but that requires the commission to agree to it. That requires ultimately the legislature to agree to it and the governor, because the commission does not have the final authority on what these maps look like. That is the legislature and the governor. So my guess is, I don't know what the political calculus would be for any member of the minority party to agree to any lines drawn by this commission. But we'll see. Maybe that'll be different this time. The assembly situation gives us another chance to see how that's going to play out.
So Cuomo kicked the can down the road in, I believe, 2014. Did that harm the reapportion process?
Well, what's in the state constitution is largely the brainchild of former Governor Cuomo, and he got legislative approval on it. For a constitutional amendment to pass, both houses of the legislature have to pass it twice, and then it goes to the voters. And you're right, in 2014, it went to the voters, and it was, overwhelmingly approved. Now, my organization opposed it for, among other things, that we thought it was designed to fail. So I'm sorry to say that we were right. But nevertheless, that is the situation it's in. And it's not, Cuomo himself did not make it happen. He might have been the political leader that whipped the votes together to make it happen. But ultimately, the voters are the people that approved it, even if they were bamboozled by what it was that the proposal would actually do. Nevertheless, that is the way it is. And it's so Governor Cuomo, Governor Cuomo is the initiator to make all this sort of system happen, but he's not the sole architect.
So the next session, the next congressional session will be very interesting. So do you have anything else to add?
Well, I mean, you know, as we're talking, COP27 is playing out in Egypt. And COP27 is the meeting, the annual meeting of the world to discuss climate change. And this is the 27th meeting. Every 5 years are the big COPs. Every other year are the small COPs. This is a little COP one. But it's pretty clear, you know, if anybody looks out the window. I mean, last week we in Albany were enjoying 70-degree temperatures, and now Buffalo is about to get 3 feet of snow.
Right.
I mean, it's real. It's happening. It's catastrophic. Lots and lots of people are going to suffer in miserable conditions, and many will die early because of what's going to happen with the climate. And we can't forget that. And so while, you know, the dumb things that happen politically are, you know, interesting and fun to watch, the consequences can be devastating. So, for example, there's a whole bunch of House Republicans that don't even believe that climate change is real, much less that it's the result of the burning of fossil fuels, which is what science tells you. And so that they're probably going to end up blocking policy in Washington. And so that leaves it to places like New York to sort of show the country and ultimately the world how to handle climate change properly and to protect its citizens as best it can. Because it's not going to, you know, if all greenhouse gas emissions stop today, it's still going to keep getting hotter. And if greenhouse gas emissions don't stop soon, it's going to get too hot to handle.
So do you think that the 4 seats that the Democrats lost in New York will have an ultimate effect on the entire world? Is that what you're saying?
Short answer, yes.
Wow.
Climate is just one example of it, but you know, I mean, if the nation defaults on its debts, or they decide that part of the deal is to cut back on benefits to people living on Social Security, which a huge percentage of seniors live on Social Security, nothing else. That's going to be horrible, both for the world in terms of climate and default, and for the country if people living on Social Security, which is the biggest safety net in the country, if that gets shredded. So yeah, it's a big deal.
Wow. I love your rosy predictions.
Well, I mean, let me just flip it though. It's
Okay.
going to be, that means there's a bunch of Republicans in New York who are in Democratic districts. And for them to succeed in 2024, they're going to have to be a moderating force on the more fire-breathing ideologue element of their conference. And so in an ironic way, there are new members of the House of Representatives, Republican new members of the House, who have an outsized role to play. So soon to be elected Congressman Mark Molinaro, who's a conservative. I mean, I've known him for a long time when he was in the Assembly, but he's the kind of person who is a sort of a level-headed person who's going to have to deal with the country. And it's going to end up just like it's a minor majority for Republicans. And right now it's a minor majority for Democrats. You need all of them. And so the Molinaros of the world and the others that are new, that are won in Democratic districts, they could make the difference in terms of whether or not we have good or bad policy in the United States, which impacts the world. So that's the rosy way to look at it. All roads lead to New York, Cynthia.
Oh, wow. So I'm sure that you and I will be talking during the winter, during the legislative session. So you've been listening to Blair Horner, Executive Director of NYPIRG. Blair, give your organization a little plug.
A little plug is we're a statewide 50-year-old nonpartisan, strictly nonpartisan, not-for-profit. If people want to know more, they can go to our website at www.nypirg.org.
Thank you. You've been listening to Blair Horner. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Focus on Albany. And if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks, Blair, for being on today. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a great day.
Thank you.